So fired up to have our next guest on the Fortitude Forum here today. He is the operating advisor at Nautic Partners. He is on the board of directors at several major companies, and he is also, you got to hear this, he is also one of a very select few members of former athletes who have played for Nick Saban. Albert Thigpen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Great to be on.
Absolutely, and I'm so excited. I want to tell you first and foremost, I've always felt very fortunate that I've been able to spend this very unique point in time with head coach Nick Saban. I got 5 years with him. I was in his first recruiting class at Michigan State. That was before he became actually Nick Saban and won all the championships. But you did me one better. You actually caught lightning in a bottle with him for 1 year, his only year at Toledo. So tell me, what was that like, and what are your first memories of playing for head coach Nick Saban back then?
Oh, it's a great question. I will tell you that it is great to be part of that small community of athletes who had a chance to experience his leadership and his coaching ability. And my personal experience with Nick, I can talk this entire show just about that because there
Yeah.
are so many unique instances that I've personally been benefit from. But I remember when Nick came in, I was in my sophomore year and we ended up going 6-5 and we were making a coaching change. So Nick comes in relatively towards the end of the football season, right before we start winter conditioning. And we knew him and the AD announced him and we come on in. Winter conditioning, Bill, it's tough, man. And it is early in the morning and some of those training sessions are just brutal. And I'm in pharmacy school at the time and I've got an 8 o'clock class every Monday through Friday during the week. So conditioning is starting at 6 in the arena. And it was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Now, I do know we share a commonality in the strength and conditioning coach, Ken Manny, who ultimately stayed on for us at the University of Toledo and then went with Nick to Michigan State. And he was also part of the diabolical schemes that they set up for winter conditioning at the time. But I remember how aggressive he was out of the gate. And I remember how rigid he was in making us conditioned for the upcoming season and how different it was from my previous 2 years. And I distinctly remember going through this program in winter conditioning, and it was basically about 75, 80 minutes long of super intense mat drills and sprints and quarter mile timed laps around the gym. And we got done and you're dead. You're dead after the entire thing. And so, man, now I got to go shower and go to class and can I stay up and, get my head focused. One day, probably within the first week of him being there, he got so upset at our effort, he blew the whistle at the very end and said, "We're starting the entire program over. You're going to run the entire program all over again." And I'm like, there's no way. I physically don't have the energy to go through that one more time. And we did. I had to miss my class. And I'm like, I got a class, coach, at 8 o'clock. And he said, "You're going to miss your class," with some profanity mixed into it at the time, but starting it over. And Bill, probably midway through, we were puking buckets around and it was just horrible. From that very early on, he set the stage of, we are going to be the best conditioned team. You will be a disciplined team. You will be focused on what I'm telling you need to do in order to win. And it's like, we had no choice but to listen and embrace it. And for me, it was, you're going from one culture, planning and football management and preparation, to a completely polar opposite, which is incredibly intense. And it only started from there. So from conditioning into spring ball and spring training, and then into the ultimate season, I just continued to learn and glob on to anything he was willing to share. And I was, quite frankly, shocked at how much I didn't know about the game. Here I'm playing. This would have been my third season starting at center at Toledo. And here I think I pretty much know a lot and I feel pretty good. I'm pretty confident in my abilities, that I know what the hell's going on. I was shocked at how little I didn't understand about the game until Nick entered the picture. And he was so smart about the absolute smallest details of the game. And I'll share one particular instance, because this thing, and I know I shared this with you as we were prepping for this, having to train or work out with Ken Manny like early in the morning before an 8 o'clock class, or go through this, or even try to get my film time in before these classes hit, because I didn't have this luxury of going at lunchtime or going 2 hours before the practice starts and watch your game film and do all your scouting and do all this and that and learn about it. So I'm doing all this in the morning, like really early in the morning to get things done. And I remember after one of the conditioning practices, or one of the workouts with Ken, I'm going in, I'm watching film, and here comes Coach Saban, and he sits in the room with me, just him and I in the film. And we're watching film, and you see what that DB did? Did you see what that linebacker did? I said, no. And here he grabs the clicker and he rewinds it. And he goes, watch it again. He goes, you see how much pressure is on that defensive tackle's knuckles? And I'm like, no, but I do now. And I'm like, God, what's he picking this up at? But I think for a student athlete who is sitting there with arguably the best college coach of all time, and just have him break game film down with you and show you how to prepare for a game. I have never, ever forgotten that. And I've gotten so much better of a student of the game myself, including the minute details that are primarily overlooked by a lot of coaches or not necessarily as focused on. And how that became a difference maker in what made a successful team and what didn't. Those really minute details that are just relentlessly focused on to make a big difference. And I think a lot of people who know Coach Saban or have played for Coach Saban, and he says you have to trust the process. The process is never really well defined unless you've actually been through his process and you've been through his planning, his preparation, and how he teaches you and how he coaches you and how you look at things through different lenses to be prepared and be successful. And I think that is a huge piece of the puzzle that has stayed with me even in my business career, is never overlook the small details. Never take for granted the smaller things that are important to the business or important to some employee or important to differentiate yourself, because it's even like mastering those basics can ultimately end up being the differentiator for a winning and losing or a successful or non-successful company at the end of the day. And I myself keep coming back to these really basic principles of, even in business, we got to learn to block and tackle. And no disrespect to a great quarterback like you, Bill, on throwing the ball, but man, you got to block and you got to tackle. You got to run the ball, you got to throw the ball, but you got to block and tackle. Those basic fundamentals. And I think so many people overlook how important the basic fundamentals are in winning the game versus trying to craft some elaborate scheme and do things that don't focus on those and still try to win games. It's just a recipe for failure.
Wow, so much to unpack there. And you're right. We could spend the entire day really just talking about Coach Saban and all that he has taught both of us. But I really appreciate it and am blown away by your recollection of that fourth quarter program, which he called, I'm sure he called it the same thing at Toledo, because he called it the same thing in Michigan State. And I believe in his other stops in college, that conditioning off-season program. And I want to emphasize that was in the off-season. You mentioned that he wanted us to be the best conditioned team, but that was in February. That program was in February. We didn't have a game until September. So I think it was more about the mentality and establishing that culture. But I'm curious, in your eyes, given what you learned from him and in terms of discipline, in terms of teamwork, was there anything above what you just mentioned about leadership that still carries with you in what you do today in business?
Yeah, there's a million examples for that, but I will tell you, I think there's a few things that stick with me that Nick has at least shared and have embedded in my architecture as a leader, is that first thing about details. Never overlook anything that is remotely tied to you doing your job. I'll share another quick example with you about Nick, which is, it really hits home with me, is that in addition to being the center, I was also a short and long snapper at Toledo. And one practice, he comes out, this is very early on spring ball, and I'm just warming up with special teams out there before the offense and defense comes out. And he's standing over top of me with a stopwatch. And I'm just warming up, doing these long snaps, 14 yards to the punter, and he's punting. And he's not saying anything until about maybe 8-9 snaps in, and he just says, blocked, blocked. I'm like, what are you talking about? So he said, if you're snapped by he goes, I go, what are you doing? And he goes, I am timing the snap between when it leaves your hands to when it hits the punter's hands. And if it is greater than 0.7 seconds, I'm blocking the punt. And for the first time, Bill, I never knew that my snaps would be, other than shooting it over his head or muffing it on the ground to the punter, that it could be blocked. So that little granular detail of timing my snaps. So long story short, 50 snaps after every practice until I got everyone under 0.7 seconds, and never had one blocked because it was bad. I may have shot one over the head of a punter because I was so damn tired at some point in time. But that detail, I tell you that story because it is important to me with anything that we do in business to make sure that the details are not overlooked, even the minute of details. And it is really important how it fits into the grand scheme of things. That's one thing. The second thing is when we talk about teamwork, is when we were preparing for games, he always made it a point from, at least from our offensive line perspective and planning for the offense, know everybody's role on the team. So being as a center that I need to know what the two guards are going to do, the two tackles, I need to know the formation clearly, what defense is going to be, but how you're thinking about it as a QB, if we had to put max protection in, or if I need to tell them this is going to be a blitz, but I need to know everybody's role on the team in order for that play to be successful. And if I know that, then I know how important my role is going to be, and I need to do my job and rely on each of those 10 individuals on the field to do their job. I can't pick up their slack. We're all kind of rowing the boat together to make sure that this play is going to be successful. But the fact that I needed to know what their role was played into why that play was going to be successful or why that team was going to be successful. So even from a leadership perspective, I don't care if they're in customer service or they're in procurement or they're in marketing or HR or legal. I got to know what their role is. And I got to know what that role is in contributing to the greater good of the team in general. So I think just understanding everyone's role as it pertains to football, translating that into the business world, man, has been incredibly valuable to me. Not only because you know what their role is, you know the importance of it, and more importantly, are they the right skill set to do that job correctly? I can't be expected to look at a talented person, put them in a role that they're going to be unsuccessful in. That would be like putting me in your role, Bill, or vice versa. It's like you expect me to throw an 80-yard post to somebody under duress. I can't do that. You could do that, of course, but understanding the talent and putting them in the role to be successful is completely tied to football at the end of the day. I think those are two. Again, we can continue to keep going, but
Yeah.
that teamwork and that discipline thing around details is something that I find myself every day coming back to in business.
Number one, I could never throw the ball 80 yards. And number two, more importantly, I could never block anybody. So you're absolutely right. We could not switch roles, at least from my end. Last question about Coach, and I promise we'll move on because this one's about you. This show's about you, and I really want to dig into your business experience and your knowledge. But there's so much to be gleaned from Coach Saban, of course. And I know just like you, he carries over so much into my day to day as well. But I was just wondering, push aside the X's and O's and the business details. Was there anything that he taught you that still stays with you today that has absolutely nothing to do with football?
I will tell you, it is there's a really important experience that I had with Coach Saban that I think you can relate to, because I think even your post this week, you were talking about this point in time when you wanted to quit, and because your body gets so beat up after time and how you continually find the resilience to get back into it. But there was a point in time in my career right after spring, or right during, before and during spring ball, where Nick was really getting intensive in our spring planning. And I was at this point in my career in pharmacy where it was a make or break point for me. And it was like, pharmacy is an ultra competitive program. They take 100 kids, 100 students every year into what they call this professional division, where you're accelerated the last 2 years before you take the boards and become a fully licensed pharmacist. And the coursework is intensive. And I had a lab that ran, I can't remember if it was Wednesday or Thursday, that ran from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right in smack dab in the middle of spring ball practice. And I remember like getting my curriculum, and I remember, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I clearly can't skip this lab. It's offered 1 day a week. It's only offered in the spring semester, and I can't skip it because it's prereqs for some other things. And I remember feeling so down on myself. I'm like, I got to quit. Maybe I got to quit football because I am not foregoing my college education and becoming a healthcare professional in the long run. And I still love what I'm doing with football. So I went and go talk to Nick Saban. And I'm like, Coach, I have an issue. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't get out of this class. It's a prerequisite for this and this. I do not want to let my team down. I do not want to miss these practices. I know it's important. Spring's a big jump off point for what we're going to do in the fall. And he very calmly said, priorities matter. Your personal life and your professional life matter. Football matters. Football may be your professional career. Football may not be your professional career, but your priorities matter. And pharmacy is a priority for you, and we will work around that. And I said, what can I do? He said, you're going to go to class. You're going to go to your lab. He said, we will move the practice to make sure that you are taking care of business in classroom first. We will take care of the practice after the fact. Now, I remember being there late on those practices. We never moved the day, but we moved like the full team offensive prep work and everything else to the following day where I could be part of the ones against the ones and all this and that we had to do. I think a lot of people think that when they see or hear Coach Saban talk, it's like, it's all about football and it's only about football and it's all about winning or nothing at all. He's not like that as an individual. He genuinely cares about the development of the man that he is coaching. And I have that personal experience from him on saying your priorities matter and what you want to do in your life matters. And I just felt so blessed that he was that open and that understanding of what I had to go through. And we made some really good moves to make it happen. And nothing got sacrificed. The team didn't sacrifice, offense didn't sacrifice. Clearly, my pharmacy curriculum and planning didn't sacrifice or falter either, and we all ended up in the right spot. So with that, I think that lesson that he taught me was make sure you're continually evaluating your priorities, even in the business world. What is the priority? You can get bogged down with due diligence and budgets and finance and the risks and the pros and the cons and the opportunities that you need to do to run the business. Never lose sight of the priority. Never lose sight of what they are in your life, whether it is in business or it's in your personal life, and you got to balance them all, to pull them all together. And for a young kid going through school at that point in time where there's so much pressure and anxiety, he was a breath of fresh air. And I thank him to this day for listening to me about that.
Wow, that is a great story. And I tell people all the time the thing that they don't know about Nick Saban, the thing that I wish more people knew about him, like you just illustrated, is that he cares so much about his players. He truly does. Everybody thinks he's all about himself and the wins and losses, but he truly cares about his players. That just doesn't get broadcast enough. So I love that you just told that story. I also wanted to ask you about, not unlike a head coach, bringing together 100 football players from all across the country and different backgrounds. You've been involved in mergers and acquisitions. So I'm just curious, when you bring two separate groups or separate entities together, things like vision and purpose can be a hindrance at times, I would imagine, or it can also be an advantage. So how do you bring together two separate groups and merge them and get them to buy in, so to speak, to that one North Star, that one goal, or that one mission? What does that look like in that world?
Yeah, it is an excellent question. And I will tell you, just to give some context and background, I think in my 30 plus healthcare career that I've been dealing with now, I'm pretty much over 20 to 22 mergers and acquisitions that I have been a part of, some on the buying end, some on the selling end, but a combination of the two. The question you raise has been consistent across each one of those. And there is a playbook for successful ones, and we tend to operate underneath that playbook all the time. And basically, first off is you have got to develop a culture. And when you're bringing together two entities, it may not be one of the prevailing company cultures. You want to say is there's just some things that these guys do great, and there's some things that this company does great, but we have to develop a new culture moving forward. And it may be something that is completely foreign to both of those underlying companies first off. So establishing the culture, separate and distinct from mission and vision and goals and all that, Bill, culture will eat strategies lunch 10 times out of 10. And you have got to have the culture in the background. And again, whether we call it culture in the business world or we call it the process in Saban vernacular, they're one and the same to me on how that works. So culture is really key. Now, the second part of the culture is how do we get them to buy into it? We want to be the best of this, or we want to do this, and we want to be differentiated with great patient outcomes and be the alternative and blah, blah, blah. Whatever that is, those are words on paper. Culture is what is the executor of the mission and the vision and the statement, and now we got to get people to buy into that. So the second part of it is that I use this term internally with M&A is that we like to run the best athlete drill. So I'm going to have two people who do marketing in this case. I'm going to have two people to do legal. I'm going to have two people to do ops, or two people to do customer service, or two people to do procurement. I don't need two. I need the best athlete. So we have to line these people up and understand here's how they're programmed, here's what they do, here's how they lead, here's how they follow, here's how they think, here's how they build their teams, here's how they motivate their teams, here's how they fit into the culture or the process. But we do have to consider taking the best athlete of the two. Once we determine that best athlete, obviously, we need to have their input. The people need skin in the game. The best companies and the best cultures that are developed are not the ones that are just shoved down their throat. They have to have buy-in, they have to have skin in the game, and they have to have aligned incentives across the board. And I felt that the most successful ones is that if I'm asking these new best athlete leaders on what's going to make us successful here, or how are you going to contribute to this culture, and how do we build that is building the process in general, and having them have buy-in and say so into it. Because if they have buy-in and they have skin in the game, they're more apt to accept it and adopt it and continue to drive it home and refine it over time. And in some cases, we make great decisions on those leaders. Some cases, we make the not so great decision on the leader. We've made bad hires. I've made bad hires in the past. And I think ultimately, once the cultures develop, hopefully we get the best athlete drill done. We get them to buy in to build the right goals and objectives and align the incentives. The last thing I will say, Bill, is that we lived by this motto with M&A, is that we're going to be successful. We're going to have the right culture. We're going to have the best talent and the right people to do the job. But at the end of the day, in order for us to win, we're going to change the people, or we're going to change the people. And ultimately, I live by that, meaning these people are going to change. Forget about their past, forget about their biases, and buy into this culture and really ride home on the new culture, or we're just going to change them out and get the people who will. And I think that has been probably the most prevailing kind of methodology that I've used with it. Some of it still is all embedded in the fundamental background of football and teams and discipline and best athletes and how we move forward. But so far, it hasn't proven me wrong yet.
No, I love it. And I can continue as you talk about all these different subjects. I can just continue to see the parallels, not just from sports in general, but Coach Saban specifically. And no doubt why you've been successful. And of course, we all know how successful he has been over the course of his career as well. So I love it. I love hearing the parallels. Can you tell me a specific time when culture, in one of these situations, when culture actually helped smooth that transition, when maybe later down the road you learned about potential pitfalls that you would have run into had you not done what you just described with the culture?
I'll tell you one that was incredibly eye-opening to me and just like a really good learning experience was in 2007. I know, going back some time, I was working in an organization called Caremark, and it was a pharmacy benefit management group. It was one of the leaders in that particular space. And we were in a rather detailed diligence with a merger, if you will, with CVS pharmacies. And this was at a point in time where pharmacies were under duress, both CVS and Walgreens. There was a lot of stuff going on with the formation of Medicare in general, so won't bore you with all the details of healthcare, but safe to say is that you're taking a PBM, which is managing how prescriptions are bought and sold and paid for in the United States, and merging it with one of its mortal enemies in the retail pharmacy segment. And historically, Bill, those two kind of hate each other. So now we are, on paper, it was a merger of equals. It was a $21 billion transaction in 2007, where CVS took over the Caremark umbrella and said, now we're going to put two entities who hate each other in the same room to build a brand new company and revolutionize how healthcare and pharmacy is going to be delivered. And getting back to those principles of best athlete and what culture prevails, this and that, I don't believe we had those fundamentals in place when we did that deal. Because I will tell you, there was so much teeth gnashing and our model's better and your model's not. And I hated you for doing this to my reimbursement and all this that was really not bubbling up to be a really good culture. And we fought each other for the first probably good year. Now, I will tell you that both CEOs ended up leaving the company. Both CFOs ended up leaving the company. And there were several of us that were continuing to try to, how do we make it work? How do we make it work? And our clients, we were losing clients. The street and the shareholders were not happy with what was going on. We weren't generating immense value at the point in time. And I'll tell you, Bill, there was a point in time where I thought the shareholders were going to force us to break the company back apart because it wasn't working. And lo and behold, after we got some changes of leadership, got a brand new CEO in, some changes that were done, that we finally said, let's redevelop a new culture and let's blend these teams and let's get the best athletes and let's start leading the right way, putting the mission and the objectives together right, tangible grounders and doubles and things like that where we can continue to have success. So people continue to build confidence in the model and what we're doing. And we finally got there, but it was at the expense of a lot. So I will tell you, that was for me being like on the senior executive team, and I had responsibilities to make that happen. I was also a victim and a perpetrator of my way was the best way, and I wasn't necessarily open to hearing what this other culture was trying to tell me. And shame on me for doing that, but it was a hard lesson learned, and finally got to the right point. And lo and behold, if you look at CVS Caremark now, that was the fundamental merger that had happened before they ended up acquiring the Aetna organization, and now they're a Fortune 5 company in healthcare and leading the way. But it was not without its own cuts and bruises to get there.
Hey, championship teams, sometimes the players and the teammates aren't always the best of friends. I've certainly been in that spot, and I know that you have as well. Again, I can see why that's been so successful, and I love hearing the progression of the story that you just told, from being at the bottom and really being uncertain about where things are going and then figuring it out. And like you said, getting the right culture, a new culture, and developing that. And also, of course, getting the right players in place. Very insightful. I'm curious, though, in your leadership journey in general, what's been maybe the biggest personal lesson that you've learned in terms of maintaining your own personal resilience in these situations where you're trying to bring a lot of people together, maybe with conflicting opinions? How have you maintained that mental toughness, that mental fortitude, in continuing to step forward in those situations?
This was a great question. And I got to talk about my wife, Monica, here, because she's an HR executive, and we were part of an organization where I got exposed to a tool called Gallup Strengths Finder. And I don't know if you've ever been through it, Bill, but several of the larger
Yep.
publicly traded companies have gone through it. And I think in terms of your question around resilience and keeping focused and being centered and building the cultures of people, bringing it together, you have to know how people are programmed. And Gallup helped me understand that even within my own team, what are the strengths of certain people and what are the weaknesses of people? And how do they communicate? And how do we rely on their strengths to do that? I personally have learned from myself through going through this whole process with Monica and when she helped me go through a lot of my individual direct reports and my teams, is like, when they were afraid to talk to me about certain things, or when they were very skeptical about certain things, or they weren't understanding it, just because that's how they're programmed to think. So I had to change how I communicated based off of who I knew, how they were receiving that information from me. And some of it is, you can be an aggressive leader and a coach and have a very aggressive, commanding style when you talk, or you could be, or some people require having a more empathetic, vulnerable tone that you need to communicate, and that's how they kind of stick and they hear it. But I think first and foremost, really understanding someone's strengths across the board and continuing to play on the strengths is a really good way to overcome a lot of those issues that may end up ultimately becoming stumbling blocks. And it's not easily understood. It takes time to really understand that aspect of it. And I will tell you personally, from myself, one of the lessons that I learned going through that was that I have in my top 5 is a trait called futuristic, meaning I'm one of these people that can see the big picture and kind of connect all the dots. And if we're here, then we're going to go here, and I'm going to tell you exactly what we need to do in order to get there and how we're going to get there and the plan to get there. So I've always found myself like leaning back in times of uncertainty or high anxiety with folks or employees or people or companies, is continue to reinforce and paint the big picture. They have to understand where they're going. They can't just come and do their job and continue to circle and punch the clock and do day-to-day mundane tasks without knowing that it's contributing to a greater good. And what is that greater good? Continue to remind them of the big picture, and be really clear on how you communicate what that big picture is, and be cautiously optimistic. Continue to monitor progress to get there. Another thing that sports have always taught us is that if winning or losing, or what the scoreboard showed at the end of the game didn't really matter, why do we keep score in the first place? So you've got to keep score. You've got to keep score even in business, and you've got to track wins and losses and success and first downs and touchdowns and points on the board, and you've got to put points on the board on the business side too. So continue to keep score and monitor progress. How else does your employees know, or how else does your culture know if you're actually winning or losing, unless you're keeping score? So you've got to have a really good understanding of your people, understand their strengths and their weaknesses, continue to play to their strengths, continue to monitor the progress, keep score all the time, and coach them.
Great stuff. And I would add to that, especially when you're leading people, and I think you alluded to it, but it's so important to actually know yourself, because if you're in charge of other people and you're trying to figure out their own strengths and weaknesses, but you don't know your own, you're really flying blind to a large extent. And you're trying to make these tough decisions, gather people together for this common cause. And I just think it's so important. And so many people, unfortunately, go through their lives and their careers without ever truly knowing themselves. And I feel like regretful to a certain extent that I got started on that process way too late. How much more effective would I have been my college days a couple of decades ago, just doing that part of my life, if I had some of this knowledge that I have now? So I love all of those insights and those suggestions, because I think they're just so important when you're doing this really important work that has a lot of high stakes attached to it, right? Whether it's in sports or business, usually the stakes are pretty high. And I think it attracts people that are naturally attracted to those types of things. But in order to do that, you've got to have all the tools. And you mentioned a couple of great ones. So, in addition to what you just mentioned, if you're advising somebody that's maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 steps behind you in the executive leadership space, what would be the 1 or 2 additional leadership qualities that you think are the most important in terms of what we just talked about, but also in adding to that list?
If I could use an example, because this is a real life example that I'm
Yeah.
going through or have been going through with one of our portfolio companies, with our CEO. Being the chairman of this particular company, I get to mentor the CEO, and he and I are tied at the hip. And, when we were looking to bring in Danny into the company, I didn't want someone coming into the organization with already predefined biases on how the company should be run, or I didn't want to personally have someone come in and replicate the same playbook in the industry, because I knew that was a recipe for failure moving on. And we would just be like another flavor at Baskin Robbins that just tastes a little bit different, but it's ultimately ice cream at the end of the day. And so we bring Danny in, who had no experience in the PBM industry at all. He knew healthcare. He was part of the healthcare supply chain, but he didn't know PBM. So I told him when we hired him that I will teach you all the things of the business that you need to know, but I expect you to be your leader. So back to your question on the other traits, is that what made me hire Danny was the following: is that he had to understand healthcare. So he had to understand the business of which he was going to play in, which he did, check the box. But more importantly, Bill, he needed to be a great leader of people, meaning he was charismatic. He understood the talent pool of which he was in. He knew that coming into the organization, he had to go through a best athlete drill, and he had to say, there's people here that I'm going to evaluate. I'm going to take time to understand, are they good at what they're doing in their job, or maybe they're better suited in another job? Again, change the people or change the people mentality. And Danny embraced that, and he brought it in. He didn't do it in the super aggressive, I'm firing 60% of the workforce and replacing them overnight. It was more of an understanding of the people who I inherited, and actually took time to understand them. Number one is people, number two is employees, and put them in the best position to be successful. And if they lasted, then let's fill in the gaps with people, and let's go to the portal, or let's go to the draft and bring in people who can help us build the right team and move forward and go from there. But he is an exceptional leader. He is an unbelievable communicator. But more importantly, he is a really great listener. And he's not arrogant to the point where, if I'm telling him something that's been done in the past, or these other competitors tried this and this is why it failed in the first place, he gets it. So he wants to listen, he wants to learn. He understands that there's a really good mentor relationship that can help benefit him. And now we're 5, 6 years into the gig, and he has done tremendous amount of work. And I will tell you, it was risky doing it, but I'm so glad that I did. And it helps me understand that I feel good about the approach with Danny, and want to duplicate that recipe with other folks as we move forward with other key C-level jobs that we need to hire for.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Love that story too. You mentioned just a few minutes ago winning and losing and what that looks like. So, what does winning look like for you now that you're not wearing a helmet and shoulder pads anymore? Of course, you've got metrics inside the industry that you've got to track, but on a bigger scale, what does winning look like for you, either personally or from a broad perspective in business?
I think, I mean, for me now, Bill, it is about a couple of key things. Winning to me is about, first and foremost, am I healthy and doing what I'm doing? Can I get up out of bed? Can I run? Can I walk? Can I work out with my wife? Do I feel healthy? Am I taking control to be on this planet for a little while longer? Outside of that, I take my gauge of, am I being a good father? Am I being a great husband? Am I a good man just in general? Am I mentoring the right people? And even like with my kids, can I sit back and say that I did everything that I thought correctly, and can I see that in the development of my kids or their jobs or their relationships, how they're being as human beings in society today, or how I'm mentoring Danny, and is Danny being successful and is he getting value from me doing that? I view my success through the eyes of the people who I get to touch nowadays. And if they're happy and they're successful, that makes me happy across the board. It makes me feel like we're winning. And maybe it's the offensive line mentality in me. We don't get our name in the paper. I don't want to have my name in the paper. If my quarterback gets his name all over the place because I did my job and I helped him do that, then that makes me gratified and satisfied as an individual at the end of the day. Or if the tailback gets in or you throw a great block and help him get there, you're not going to see all these linemen with high notoriety outside the skill people. But at the end of the day, it's incredibly valuable to know that they couldn't have done it without us in the first place.
Very well said. Final question, and this has been awesome. So thank you again for being here. What are you excited about building next? I get this feeling from you, Albert, that there's no finish line for you. You are continuing to look for new opportunities to lead and to have an influence. What are you excited about on the horizon?
I will tell you there's a few things, and it's a great question. Thanks for asking it, Bill. Is that first and foremost, I am staying in healthcare. I am a healthcare junkie by nature, and I love pharmacy pretty much being the first line of defense on people taking control of their health and being healthy and eliminating and warding off a lot of disease in the future. But I will tell you, and I'll probably get a lot of marks for this, but healthcare is broken. Healthcare is incredibly expensive today. It is incredibly complex. And I'm educated in the healthcare space, but when I got to plan 3, 4, 5, 6 months to see my primary care doctor because he is so overloaded with work, or he is not getting reimbursed the value for which he is charged with, or I have to fight the PBM because I need to get my medication prior authorization approved, or it's expensive for some reason. Healthcare should not be that complicated. And we need companies, and where we're looking at and really continuing to play is how do we make healthcare, in two simple terms, Bill, more affordable and more accessible. And as long as we can continue to invest and find and play with companies that know how to do that, that's going to be a better recipe for success. Because at the end of the day, there's not enough good healthcare for people who need it the most. And it's very difficult to navigate. Think about you as a person that has to enroll in healthcare every year. And you get a 60 to 70 page document that tells you where your network providers are, what pharmacy you can use, what drugs you can use, what hospitals you can go to, what your copays are for urgent care or not. It's complicated. Even for the educated person, it's complicated. My question is, why do we make it so complicated? Other than these large companies that we talked about previously on this call are making hundreds of billions of dollars in profit across the board. And I understand they're not a charity. They do a lot of work too. But at the end of the day, healthcare is something that I don't think we're focused on enough that is affordable and accessible for everybody. So to the extent that we can use the appropriate technology, the appropriate artificial intelligence to streamline operations and streamline affordability and accessibility for the patient, and then use that to develop an empowered consumer where the consumer becomes their own advocate for their own healthcare. Again, getting back to this, what we talked about, Bill, people need skin in the game. They need to have control of what they're going to do. And patients are no different. Patients need information. Patients need to be empowered. They need to be educated on how to navigate the healthcare process, how to be really good stewards of their own healthcare business in general. And we ought to be the entities, or we should be striving to create and build entities that do that and empower their consumers. Some of it's going to come through technology. Some of it's going to come through the evolution of the business itself and the healthcare insurance industry. Some of it will come with new technologies through the pharmaceutical supply chain. But if we can put all those pieces of the puzzle together, not lose sight of the patient being in the middle of what we're trying to accomplish, do it more affordably and with a lot more accessibility, then I think we'll have a winning equation in healthcare.
Awesome. That is awesome stuff, Albert. And I want to mention that if in another life we had taken different paths, I would have loved to have you be my center. I think we would have made a great quarterback center combination on some team somewhere. It wouldn't have mattered. We would have done great.
I agree. I would love to wind back the clock and be able to do that. And I know you and I share pretty close proximity to where we grew up. I'm just thinking if I lived a couple blocks north or south, or you did live north or south, and we ended up at the same high school, what a great matchup that would have been. I long for those days, and I long for just one more series that I can play and put the helmet on, and would have loved to be your center, Bill, any point in time. Even again, if we end up finding doing it somewhere, at least let me give a couple snaps to you and throw the ball.
I'm sure there's a field somewhere with a ball and some receivers, and who cares if there's nobody in the stands watching? We'll make it happen.
Count on me for that one.
Thanks so much, Albert, for doing this.
All right, Bill. Appreciate you, man.